Hello everyone, welcome back to the MotoGP Podcast. I'm your host Jordan Moorland and I'm joined of course by Rob Jones and Pete McLaren for this week's episode. Now, as you know, we're in the summer break and we thought we would rank the riders out of 10 on their season so far, and we'll also score the manufacturers out of 10. So the best place to start, we kind of covered it last week with the top 3 in the championship. We give our scores. If you want to hear those, you can go back and listen to it more in detail, but we'll just kind of give our scores for them here. Well, I'll give mine. I don't know if the boys can remember theirs or not. So yeah, we'll start with the factory Ducati team, the Novo Ducati. So I give Pecco Bagnaia, I think we all did, a 9, which was pretty fair, wouldn't you say, Pete? As world champion, he's got the most race wins, he's leading the world championship, but the only criticism we kind of had was that maybe if we had said at the start of the year we would have had a bigger points lead going into the summer break. That could be maybe the only critique with Bagnaia, would you say?
I think so, yeah, and maybe that accident in the sprint race when he was leading in Barcelona, wasn't it? That was really the one big mistake. There was the technical problem in Le Mans, wasn't there, and things like that. But that's obviously out of his hands. But yeah, other than that, I mean, the form he's in, was it the last 4 Grand Prix in a row he's won, leading up to the summer break. So really, if you're Bagnaia, maybe you wouldn't have wanted a break. You would have wanted to keep going. But yeah, not much more Pecco could have done, I think.
Rob, you agree again? Just a 9 is the best we could have given Pecco at this stage.
Yeah, I agree with Pete. I think a 9 is a fair result or a fair grade at this point. He's been by far the most consistent rider. Obviously, in typical Bagnaia fashion, he sort of started the season slowly, but the run of form he's been on lately and the way he's been winning, whether it was leading pretty much every session at Assen or applying pressure at Sachsenring and causing Martin to make a mistake. I think the way he's been riding, I think he's without question been the best rider so far this season. And I think he would have liked more races to come, but I think at the same time, it's a good chance for him to reflect on the season he's had so far. And for Martin, for example, I think he would have almost wanted another race even more than Bagnaia to sort of put right the mistake, but instead he's got to sit with that. So I think for Bagnaia, he's not only winning the battle on track, but I think he's starting to sort of win the battle off track as well. So I think a 9 at this point is a very fair grade for the world champion.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to change anything with our last week's grading. I think it was all spot on pretty much. So, yeah, Enea Bastianini is our next one, Pete. I've given, it's between 2 scores. It was quite tough, actually, because he's had a really good season compared to what last season was. It was a disaster, really. Injury in the first round and everything wasn't his fault. Struggled with the GP23. I've actually given him a 7.5. I think that's a really fair and good score here because, yeah, he won a race last year, but it was maybe circumstantial. He enjoys the Malaysia circuit so much, Sepang, and he just gelled that weekend. But we're seeing a lot more consistency, and it's a bit frustrating actually because he's so fast at the end of a race, and I think this is why I didn't give him an 8, because he has so much potential maybe to win races, and it's just shown at the very end when everyone else is struggling and he's faster. If he'd done it a bit earlier, he probably would win a few Grand Prix this year already. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do, and I got to say, as soon as you said the name Bastianini, 7.5 also jumped into my head. I don't know why. I think if you're in the factory Ducati team, obviously they expect you to win races, and that's the one thing missing, isn't it? So straight away, I think it's hard to give more than let's say an 8 if you're not winning in the factory Ducati team. But as you say, there's lots of positives. When you look at where he was last year, the troubles with the bike and the injury, and I mean, he was way outside the top 10 of the World Championship, wasn't he? So yeah, massive step forward this year, but still that victory isn't there. And as you say, the end of race pace is there, but it's the qualifying and things like that. It almost seems like all of those skills that he has that are easy on the tyres, it then punishes him when he needs to work the tyre hard in qualifying over one lap. It's a bit like the Suzuki from a few years back,
isn't it?
Where it's hard to find that balance and get both. But that's what he needs, isn't it? And he's got his future assured now. I think that was one of the surprises, wasn't it, that he's going to Tech 3. Thought maybe he might go to Aprilia, but he's leaving Ducati. But really, race wins is what he needs. It's to sum it up, I think.
Rob, what would be your score for Enea? As Pete says, he's playing a really good teammate role this year, actually. You think of that overtake on Jorge Martin at Mugello. Fantastic, really, to take points. And at the last lap as well, the last corner. He's proven that, he's a really good teammate, but he'll be probably disappointed that he hasn't got a Grand Prix win at this stage so far, I think.
Yeah, I do too. I think the grade I'm going to give Bastianini is a 7. I think he has been, in large part in the race, is very, very impressive. But it's a case of, like you said, he's still not got a win this season, and that wouldn't be so bad if, he didn't really have the pace to achieve that. But we've seen in recent rounds, his pace at the end of the race has been phenomenal, able to match Bagnaia more often than not. So his qualifying has been a big problem, and I think that's where, for me, I'm not giving him more than a 7, is the struggles he's had in qualifying on that bike. He's really, even Morbidelli has been a little bit more impressive in qualifying in terms of the riders on the GP24s lately. So I think he's, out of those 4 riders, struggling the most in terms of qualifying. He's coming through in the races, which is good. And to your point, Jordan, and it's the only point for Ducati that you need, is that he's been the perfect teammate. He is taking points away from Martin, but also Marc Marquez. And he's, I think, only 10 or 11 points behind Marquez in the championship. So, he has been impressive at times. But I think from a personal perspective for him, he's not quite at the 2022 level still. And I think he needs to get there. For him, he has got his future secured, which is a big thing. And he deserves that because he has been good enough this season. And he's obviously going into another great team with a great bike. So I think next season will be a good one for Bastianini as well. But I think second half of the year, for him, the main thing will be turning the race pace he's got into wins.
Yeah, I agree. And let's see what he can do because, like you say, he's got his future secured, but he's obviously going to, I don't want to say a lesser bike. The KTM's still great, but he's on the best bike, and you think if you want to get your confidence higher, you want to win a few races or a race or two just to feel good going into your new project that he has for next year. But yeah, fair scores all around. I think we're all in the same sort of ballpark with Bagnaia. So Pramac Racing, we give Jorge Martin. I give Jorge Martin an 8.5. You both give him an 8. And yeah, I think, could it be higher because of what happens at the last round? Pete, obviously, he crashed out and he's right in there, isn't he? Obviously, he's only 10 points behind, but it could have been a 9, but an 8.5 and an 8, I think it's fair for Jorge Martin. He's been so good this year still.
Yeah, it's all sort of tainted by the last couple of rounds, isn't it, and those mistakes. But when you sort of take a step back and see where he is in the World Championship, and I think the one thing that jumped out to me after the Sachsenring, just on the the stats package that comes out, was the laps led. Martin and Bagnaia, they're on way over 100, and I think is it Vinales is on about 20.
22, yeah.
That's the gap between those two guys at the top and everyone else in terms of leading races. And I think, we said that coming into the year, Martin needed to be more consistent, and he wasn't he, in the early rounds? He did it. He was ticking all the boxes. Pecco was the one that was tripping over with Marquez in Portimao, having bike problems and everything else. But then suddenly the mistakes, Jerez, for Martin, this is Jerez, and then Mugello, and then Sachsenring, and so that's what causes us to maybe not score him higher. But certainly the bottom line is it's all to play for, isn't it? The 10 points between them. Yes, the trouble is that we're all thinking you could be, 20 points up, couldn't you? But instead you're 10 points behind. But let's face it, we don't know exactly how many rounds are left because obviously the question mark over Kazakhstan. But there's 300 plus points available, isn't there? And so there's a lot of time to make up this tiny gap. So really, it's all to play for.
Yeah, it is, and it's almost like a new season, isn't it? Like when you come back from the summer break, it's like there's still 12 plus rounds, maybe. I think it's that, isn't it? Or there's like 11 maybe left, and you're like, this is a whole new season. We're not even halfway point yet. We're at the summer break. Yeah, there's a lot of races still to come, and yeah, Martin, let's see what he can do. Rob, I think it's just trying to eradicate those mistakes that we seen last year. Like Pete said, we thought that he kind of got rid of them at the start of the year because he started so well, but old tendencies creeping back in. Even the little things, he's crashing more, I've noticed, in qualifying. He's making maybe a few more mistakes than Pecco is, but he's still qualifying well. That's his only saving grace, and of course he gets such good starts. But it's a big second half of the year for Martin, isn't it?
It is, and I think in a lot of ways, if Sachsenring hadn't have happened, he has been a 9 out of 10 in pretty much every facet this season. The big issue for Martin is, I think for me when I look at it, is the loss of momentum to a guy like Bagnaia, who will just continue to apply the pressure and won't sort of let up, and knows that from last season, he knows that he can beat Martin. And now that he's showing that form, but I think also for Martin, he has been, overall, he's had less sort of issues than Bagnaia, but it's the timing of them, which is, I think, what's bringing his grade down, but also his season, because it's crashes from the lead. It's not where it's a bad race and you're in seventh and you're trying to limit the damage and you make a mistake. It's crashes from when he's in a position where he doesn't seem to be overexerting himself, and he can take the win. It was, Jerez, he crashed from the lead in the Grand Prix. And I think I mentioned this point on last week's podcast. Bagnaia's issues have tended to come in the sprints where you don't want an issue, but the points are less. But Martin, it's giving up 25 points that should be his to his main rival. But at the same time, if we look at it from this perspective, if someone had told us all that Bagnaia would only lead him by 10 points at this point in the season, we'd probably say that was a success for Martin. So it's not the end of the world. He just needs to come back from the summer break and sort of start again the season like he did at the beginning. And then I think he can take the challenge to Bagnaia. So, but I think an 8 is just where it needs to be sort of for Martin at this point.
Yeah. And like you say, I like that point, Rob. He's losing points, not only to himself, but he's giving it to Bagnaia too. Every time he's made these mistakes, Bagnaia's won the races, and you're like, if you want to win a world title, you have to hope sometimes that your title rivals have a similar sort of thing, but it's not happening at the minute. We don't know what's going to happen in the second half of the season, but yeah, I'm excited to see what Martin and Bagnaia have against each other. Obviously, with Martin going to Aprilia as well, his last year on a Ducati, and you're like, this is going to be, I think it's going to be box office between the two of them, and hopefully we get some real titanic battles between the two. Frankie Morbidelli, this is a tough one for me, Pete. I think, he had that horrific crash at Portimao in the off-season, while training up to this season, and it really did put him on the back foot. He missed a lot of tests, and essentially the first few rounds were like test sessions for him. He had to just get used to the Ducati, the GP24. But I've gave him, and I think we're saying bias because it comes in from the last race too. He was really well, and Rob mentioned that he's qualified. I think he's been inside the top 10. He's been in Q2 anyway for the past 4 races, I think, or something like that. It's a good record he's on. I give him a 6, and I think it can get better for him. A 6 is not a bad score here, but he is on the best bike. He's on the GP24, and we only really seen it up until now, until last race. Do you think a 6 is fair? That would be his score so far this year?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I think somewhere between a 6 and a 7, because as you say, he's on the best bike. On the other hand, he missed out on hundreds of laps of testing, didn't he? And he's trying to make up for that. I think he's about where he was this time last year in the standings. When he was on the Yamaha, maybe a bit higher than he was by the end of the year. But yeah, it's really difficult to given such a disadvantage at the start of the year, isn't it? But yeah, I somewhere between a 6 and a 7, I think. But really, it's he's given everyone else such a head start with no testing that to try and, especially coming to a new bike, of course, it's not like he already knew the Ducati.
True.
And it was just learning the small changes for the latest bike. But the big question is now he's got to step up, hasn't he, again during the second half of the year. Obviously, as the year goes on, that disadvantage will diminish as he gets more laps himself. So we've got to look for him to keep improving, I suppose. That's really all he can do from now. So early days really for Frankie, I suppose we could still say.
Yeah. Rob, what's your take on Morbidelli's season so far? Because the earlier points we didn't really see him because he was, like we say, he was kind of in test mode, but he's gradually got better. But the only thing I do notice with him, in the Grand Prix especially, we see it in Sachsenring, he starts really well and then fades in the middle part, and that's where the damage is done. And he kind of sort of stabilizes it, but after that, he can't really do anything because everyone else is at the same level, and they kind of overtake him, and he kind of, not goes anonymous, but I think he's getting better. There's signs of the old Frankie there, isn't there?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a season where you sum it up as it's been good, considering the major point is that he missed all of pre-season. So switching from the Yamaha to the Ducati, it's not like he was on the same bike and sort of missed out on all those laps. He was obviously having to learn a new bike. I think a grade of between 6 and 7. I think for me, 6.5 is probably fairly accurate for Morbidelli. And I'd say the three reasons for that are, like I said, the missed laps in pre-season. I think his qualifying has been really, really good of late. And I think what was impressive at Sachsenring is not only that he could mix it at the start of the race with the likes of Martin and Bagnaia, but it was the fact that even at the end of the race, he was aggressive. The sort of Morbidelli we haven't really seen. He was aggressive and not wanting Bastianini to get that position, and he was fighting until the end of the race, even though he was struggling at that point the most out of all the Ducatis ahead of him. So, like you said, he does sort of go missing a little bit in the middle of the races at times, and that's something he's got to correct in the second half of the season, because it's not really an issue that the other Ducatis are having. In fact, they're actually getting stronger as the race goes on. So if he can rectify that, I do think we will start to see Morbidelli challenge for more top fives and potentially even podiums, because I think what's good for Morbidelli going forward is, like you said, Jordan, his grade has the potential to get better. It's the fact that the GP24 is overhauling the GP23 by quite a considerable margin now. So obviously Marc Marquez is Marc Marquez and he's still going to deliver great performances, but that edge of the GP24, and we saw it in Sachsenring where Morbidelli was battling against Marquez and was holding his own, we could, because of the bike he's on, that could allow him to also get better results and be a bit more competitive than he's shown in the first few rounds. So I think between a 6 and a 7 is a fair grade for Morbidelli, who I think is only going to get stronger as the season goes on.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement here. It's just it's like the spike is going up with Morbidelli. Let's just see if he can keep riding the wave of it. Into Aprilia now, Maverick Vinales and Alicia Spargaro. I've given Maverick, I think he's been great this year. I give him an 8. So I think compared to what we've seen previously on his Aprilia, like his first season there, his flashes of brilliance. And last year it was better, but this year I think the real Maverick have shown that when he has that pace that he had in Coda, especially, he's untouchable. And the way he works with the Aprilia, yeah, of course he's going to the KTM next year, which there's another challenge for Maverick to win on another bike. But he's been impressive, and I think that he has, he's really kind of shown people the talent that he has, and reminded people of how good he can be. An 8 for me, maybe that's a bit too high for you too, but I think it's fair for Maverick. What do you say, Pete?
Yeah, I'd go with 8 as well. Also, as I say, Bastianini I gave 7.5 because he hadn't won a race, and as you're saying there, Jordan, Vinales has. He's the only guy not on a Ducati to win, and I think for that alone, it's worth an 8. He's almost been a bit hard on himself, isn't he, lately? At recent rounds, and a bit hard on the Aprilia, feeling a bit frustrated at not being able to fight more. But I think at the end of the day, he's still doing a great season. And I think obviously riders always want to be winning, and it is frustrating that he's not able to break in to that Ducati sort of lockout at the front, especially on a Sunday, isn't it? But at the same time, like you say, some of those early races that he did, the Aprilia it's still strong. It's overhauled KTM. It's up to second in the constructors. I think 8 is a fair grade for Maverick. Yeah.
Rob, what's your score for Maverick?
It's a hat trick and 8 as well. I think he's been brilliant. I think he's been the best non-Ducati rider by a fair margin. Obviously, Acosta for different reasons has been impressive. We'll get on to him, but I think Vinales, and we've said it before, that the sort of performance he delivered at Kota, he is unbeatable when he's on that form. When the bike's performing how he needs it and he's going well at a particular circuit, he is untouchable. We saw it with Yamaha, we saw it with Suzuki when he took his first win at Silverstone, all the way back in 2015. So, Vinales has this potential, and we also, I think a good point to bring up is he started the season and he wasn't really a big fan of the current package, the 24 bike. So he had to sort of overcome a few problems in testing and in the opening couple of rounds. And obviously at Portimao took a sprint win. So he's been sensational, I think. And he has been consistent, which is something we've always talked about with Vinales. It's probably been overshadowed just because of the amount of Ducatis that consistently ahead of him. But his actual consistency, again, against non-Ducati riders, I think has been very, very good. So I think Vinales for sure deserves an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, like we say, all in agreement with Maverick. He's had a very good season so far. His teammate, Alicia Spargaro, retiring at the end of the year, of course, moving to Honda as a test rider, which is a big step for Honda as well to get him. I scored Alicia 7. I think it's been what I expected of him, because he won that. He won that sprint in Catalonia at the weekend that he announced his retirement. Was so good to see. But I haven't been. My expectation for him was roughly to be a 7. I don't know why. I think he had such a good 22 last year. Struggled a bit, but won more races in 23, which was good for him. And I think, announcing the retirement, I think you can see a bit of. He looks a lot more relaxed and he looks a lot more just calm. And he knows that this is going to be his last year, full year properly as a full-time rider. And yeah, he's had some big crashes, but I think his pace has been strong. Does go missing a little bit. I think back to Qatar, where he really had strong pace, and I thought that he was going to challenge the Ducatis, and it never really came to it. But yeah, a 7 for Elisa Spargo, I think, is fair. Pete, what would you score his season so far?
Yeah, I'd say 7.5 for me. Just because, as you say, announces his retirement and then wins the sprint race at home. I mean, that alone, I'll give him half a point more just for that. As you say, I suppose the question mark with the late is those injuries you mentioned, the crashes. What might you have done? The Aprilia working really well at the Sachsenring, and he's not even in the race. So we don't quite know Aston Sachsenring what he might have been capable there. So yeah, I'd go with that for now.
Yeah. And then we move on to Gresini Racing. So we give M.Marquez. Well, I give M.Marquez an 8.5. You both give him an 8. Are you just going to stick with those scores? Or are you going to change them? Or do you think an 8.5 or an 8 is fair? Because he hasn't got that Grand Prix win, and that's the reason why I think. I don't know. I could have maybe just given him an 8, but I think 8.5 for the comeback rides is the thing that I upped it to, because I mean he started 13th, 14th in France, and then was it Catalonia, and then the Sachsenring, and he's been on the Grand Prix podium every single time from it, and you're like, the rides are incredible, and the resurgence of his form has been great to see. He's got the factory Ducati right next year. That goes into it as well, but that Grand Prix win and the win even from a sprint race is still eluding him, Pete. I think, yeah, he'll be disappointed that he hasn't won at the Sachsenring, for example, because it was such an up and down weekend. The sprint in, well, even the Grand Prix at Coda, he had the issues, and then the sprint, he had that issue with the dam patch at Jerez. Just a lot of little things, but a great season so far from Marquez.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, mission accomplished, isn't it, really? He went to Gresini wanting to sort of restart his career, didn't he? See if he still enjoyed racing, still had what it takes, and I mean, undoubtedly he has. So, and as you say, got the factory Ducati deal done already. So there we are. What a half of the year. Just the win is missing, though that is the only thing. But on the other hand, you look how far ahead he is of the other guys on the same bike, isn't it? And so you could put Mark anywhere between 8 and 9 would be, I think, a fair grade, and you could make a case for either end of that, really.
Yeah, Rob, do you agree? Is that pretty much it? It's the same, isn't it? He's just everything apart from the win, really.
Yeah, I do. I'm going to stick with an 8. I think he's been tremendous, and I think we sometimes get caught up with such high-end sort of sports stars like a Marc Marquez, and just think the change from Honda to Ducati will be nothing to someone like him. But I think it is the amount of time he spent on a Honda. It is a very big thing to overcome, and I think the way he's adjusted to that Ducati, even when he still had a long way to go in his process, he was still competitive at Qatar. He was competitive at Portimao, mixing it with Bagnaia, obviously before they clashed. But to be on track and fighting with the likes of Martin and Bagnaia from the get-go, I think he's been brilliant. Obviously, the win is just missing. I think Jerez, Le Mans, and Sachsenring, in terms of pace, are the 3 Grand Prix he could have won. Yeah. He obviously could have won the sprint as well at Jerez, but crashed out from the lead just after getting through on Martin. So there's been chances, and he has lost out a little bit, you could say there. But then at the same time, for what he's maybe missed out in terms of not taking a win yet, I think, to your point, Jordan, the comeback rides, again, on a new bike to him, have been nothing short of sensational.
Yeah.
And Pete mentioned it as well, the gap to the other GP23s. Dijan Antonio's been getting a bit closer recently, but over a Grand Prix, like at Sachsenring, Marquez still again once again just showed he's got the edge on them. And to close in on Alex Marquez the way he did and take second spot, it's just been a very, very good season. For me, I think he was Ducati's right decision to go with in terms of being partner to Bagnaia next season, and I think he will win at some point this season. But it's been a very good start to his first season at Ducati, I would say.
Yeah, it has. It has been. And yeah, I agree with everything you both said. And let's see what Mark can do in the second half of the year. But his brother, teammate Alex, I give him a 7 because I think it's kind of been a similar year to last year for Alex. He, of course, won sprint races last year, but I've been quietly impressed. I think he's one thing I say about Alex Marquez, he's maybe cut out crashes and he's finishing more races and he's scoring points more. And it backs up with the podium last time out in Sachsenring. I think he shown fantastic pace and he was able to run with his brother for pretty much all the race until obviously caught in the past. But to get on the podium in a dry race around the Sachsenring where the pace was so hot and he had a good weekend. He had a good weekend again in Assen. And he's showing that, to get a 2-year contract again with Gresini, be riding the older Ducati, of course, next year. But I think he's adapted pretty well compared to, say, Bezzecchi, for example, from the 22 to the 23. A 7, I think, is fair for him. Pete, what would your score be for Alex?
Yeah, I was trying to remember. He gave himself a score, didn't he? Was it something like 6.5 or something like that?
Yeah, it was around that. Yeah.
So yeah, 6.57. I think if that's what I mean. Obviously, that the podium is the high. So he's gone into the summer break, as you say, with that result in the bag. He's not a million miles from Di Giannantonio, is he? Obviously, Mark, as we've just said, is a step ahead of the other guys on the 23, but he's keeping in touch. I think he's about where he was in the championship last year. So yeah. He's made no secret of the fact that he's not as comfortable on this 23 bike as he was on the 22. Just doesn't quite suit his style. But let's see if the updates hopefully will make their way to the satellite teams, will help him, and that he can get back to that form. As you say, those sprint wins were really impressive last year. So let's see. He clearly isn't satisfied if that's what the score that he's giving himself. But a solid foundation for the second half of the year.
Yeah. Rob, what's your take on Alex Marquez's season so far? What's your score for him?
My score's at 6.5. I think he has been very, very good at times. I think he's been sort of underrated. And, for any rider, obviously being his brother as well, to have someone like M.Marquez come into that garage, it would be very easy, I think, to get lost in the shuffle and potentially lose confidence when he wasn't getting the results at the beginning of the year and Mark was. But I think Alex Marquez has been really, really good at times. I think Sachsenring was the start of what hopefully should be a better second half to the year. He got stronger as last season went on, obviously with the sprint wins, and Silverstone was the highlight. I think we'll see that sort of form again from Alex Marquez as the year goes on. I think Gresini also value him a lot, and that's been shown with retaining him for another season. So I think he's played the perfect role in that team. And I think there is a lot more to come from Alex Marquez this season. So I think a 6.5 to a 7 is a very fair grade.
Yeah, and like you say, Pete, it's up to the upgrades if they get them or not. Let's see what happens. Is the gap going to close between the 23 and the 24? That's the key, isn't it? So we'll see what happens in the second half of the year. But yeah, fair scores I think for the Gresini boys. And to the satellite Aprilia team, Trackhouse Racing, a debut year for them. It was really difficult to score this one. I actually found it quite hard. We'll go with Raul Fernandez first. I give him a 7 because I think the thing that stands out for me, Pete, is that race in Barcelona where he completely it was an unbelievable overtake on Pedro Acosta, like a mad block pass, and he cleared off up the road for 2 laps, then he crashed, unfortunately. He showed real strong qualifying pace, but he's dropped off. But I think this is the Raul Fernandez maybe I expected 2 years ago. That'd be fair to say. And yeah, I think it's been a good season for him.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's probably one of my surprises of the year, as in positive surprises, because I didn't see that coming. As you say, when I think back of the moments in the first half of the season, taking the lead at Barcelona the way that he did, it was like, where's this come from? Where's it been for the last couple of seasons? This Raul Fernandez, isn't it? It might well, that race. Obviously, he's had a front row qualifying Sachsenring. He's been quick in a few others, but that race might have been the turning point and the moment that keeps him in MotoGP. It seems like Trackhouse and Aprilia are really keen to keep him, aren't they? And there's more of a question mark on what Oliveira wants to do. Does he want to stay or leave? But it seems like Raul will probably be there, and that's got to have been a big part of it. So yeah, 7.5 I'm going to say, I think. Honestly, that was one of my surprises so far, I think.
Rob, Raul Fernandez, what's your score?
Same as you, John. 7. I think he has been really, really good. Obviously, slow start to the year, but I think it's difficult. Bagnaia in Barcelona pretty much said if he thought he would have won that race regardless of what had happened, prior to his crash. I genuinely think if Fernandez hadn't crashed, he would have won that sprint. I think his pace, and he was sort of controlling it. He didn't look out of control, and it also, considering it's the first time he was leading a race, he seemed quite natural in that position.
Yeah.
And I think Fernandez, as he gets stronger and is in that position more, I think he'll adapt to it and he'll get better with experience. And I think obviously a front row start, Sachsenring highlighted again the sort of form he's been on, and that was after a crash on Friday as well, a fairly big crash. So Fernandez has been very, very impressive, and I think the results he's had we maybe expected from Oliveira, and instead it's been Fernandez leading that team in some way. So I think he's been very, very strong. A bit like Alex Marquez, I think he's only going to get stronger, and I think we're also starting to see, without anything being confirmed, I think we're starting to see the confidence of Fernandez knowing what he might be doing next season also playing out a bit. So I think Fernandez is in a good position going forward, and I think a 7 is a good score for him.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement with Raul Fernandez. A very good season, and let's see if it continues, because he most likely is going to get the upgraded. Well, he's going to get the 24, so he'll be on level playing field with all the other Aprilia riders. That'll be really interesting to see how him and Oliveira compare there. So we'll have a look. And speaking of Miguel Oliveira, again, he had such a good weekend in Sachsenring. It was like the weekend where he showed himself finally. But I think he's been pretty anonymous all year, and I give him a 6. It could have been a 5.5. I expected so much more from Miguel, to be honest, and that's how highly I think of him as a rider. I think he's a great rider. He's shown it so much on the KTM, even in his Moto 2 and Moto 3 days. Just looked a bit lost at times, and I'm glad to see that he kind of shown that form that he did have in the Sachsenring. But a 6 for me, I think, is fair. Pete, what would you say Oliveira's season has been so far?
Yeah, I'm thinking sort of 6.5 maybe, just for that. But again, it's hard because you don't know the situation in the team, do you? And we're hearing that Brivio is trying to make get new engineers in and get more engineers in, build the team up. You never quite know what riders are dealing with behind the scenes, do you? He's obviously got the 24 bike, so when you just look at it in terms of comparing him to Aleix and to Vinales, it doesn't look good, does it? But then there's been a lot of issues, isn't there, and things like that. And it seems like when they just didn't touch the bike at the Sachsenring effectively, obviously
it was better.
That's an exaggeration, but yeah, exactly. He just some suspension stuff, bit of electronics, and he just rode it as it was. And we saw the Miguel Oliveira of the KTM years sort of coming out, didn't we? So yeah, it's we need to see if this result was a turning point or a blip, don't we? That's what makes this so difficult. So the races after the summer break are going to be really important for that, I think.
Rob, what's your take on Miguel? How do you think he's been so far this year?
Like you said, anonymous. I don't know if this is too harsh a score. I'm going to give him a 5.5 because it's one of those, like Pete mentioned, and it is a good point. We don't know everything behind the scenes. So that's the caveat to this grade. But if we're just taking it like at this point we can, which is on results and on performance, I think more often than not he's been the 4th best Aprilia, and given his experience and the fact that he was brought into that team to sort of lead that team, and whilst Fernandez sort of comes along, I think Fernandez has outshone him, and I think Sachsenring was a great weekend for Oliveira, and this grade from a 5.5 will quickly go in the right direction if he has a few more races like that. I think it would be a lot easier to grade Oliveira if we had one more race, and if it went back to sort of being struggling to get in the points or into the top 10, then you would maybe say that this is a bit more justified because it might have been a one-off or a blip sort of performance. The potential in that bike is there. It's not the potential of the Ducati, we know that. But I think for Oliveira, it's been... I don't think we're going to have a situation where he's not in MotoGP next season, but I think whatever happens and wherever he goes next season or stays, it is going to be a make or break season in 2025. And I think for Oliveira, he does need to regain some of the form he had at KTM in previous years, because I think for a first season with that team, it's been very, very disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. So I think, let's see, like you both say, if it was a turning point or if it was just a one-off. Let's see what Miguel can do when we get to the second half of the year. I want to go to Yamaha. Now, it's very difficult. I think out of the Japanese manufacturers, I think they've shown the most improvement, the intention to improve, keeping Quartararo there as well. And I give them both the same score, but the score is 2. It's changed. 6.5 or a 7. I think I'm going to go with 7 for both Yamaha riders. I think just in the sense that I've seen flashes of, wow, like, look at Rins I think it was Mugello, wasn't it, where he was so fast on the Friday, and he was inside the top 3, and you're like, where has this came from? Of course, they've done more testing than everyone, but I think the flashes of Quartararo showing that, the pace is still there. Both of them are going to get a 7 for me, and I think it's due to Yamaha really saying to both riders the project is growing, of course, with the addition of Pramac next year. I think it's been better for Yamaha, so it has. A 7 is different than the 7 would maybe give someone else. It's a different context. That's what I'll put out there. I think it's an improving project, and Yamaha are in a good place, even though it might not show it on track as much. Does that make sense, Pete?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It's hard, isn't it, to separate the rider from the machine and the team? That's the tricky bit in this, isn't it? And as you say, you've got like Quartararo. He's leading the Japanese Cup, isn't he? So we can say that much. He's clearly better. There's that clear separation at the moment between the European machines and the Japanese machines, and he's easily leading that battle, if you like. So yeah, I think a 7 is certainly fair for that. But you don't know. I mean, he believes he's riding better than he was in his World Championship winning season. So if it's got to be a combined grade of the bike and the team and the rider, isn't it? It's probably a 7. Whereas for him personally, he might believe he's riding at a 8.59. Certainly he believes that race at Le Mans, where he was riding, he said, over the limit, almost every corner, every lap. But when you don't have a competitive bike, it's hard to make that difference, or to make the difference visible, I should say, isn't it? And get the points and everything else. So yeah, I'd say about 7. And Rin's difficult because adapting to a new bike, and as you say, we've seen some flashes of speed where you think, okay, he's getting to terms with this quickly. But then he's had the injury again, and that always sets everyone back, isn't it? So really hard on that one. But yeah, tricky because they're limited by the machinery, aren't they?
That's it, and we'll come on to that more when we talk about the Honda riders too. That won't be the only thing. So the grades are slightly different for them, but I think we're all in agreement, Rob, that Yamaha are definitely showing signs of improvement, even though it might not seem it sometimes. But I get the sense that they're in a good place going for the future, especially with getting Pramac on board too.
Yeah, I think securing Pramac is a major step for Yamaha, but also for the 2 factory riders to have that situation of having more data. And we don't know what riders are going to be at Pramac next season at the moment, but you'd have to say they're probably going to be very, very good riders, potentially someone like an Oliveira or a Jack Miller, someone with a lot of experience. So that will help. I think for me, Quartararo, a 7.5. I think he's been tremendous because I think week after week he's getting the absolute maximum from that bike, and I think he's riding like the 2021 world champion that he is. I think Quartararo has been very, very impressive. Obviously Alex Rins, a bit like Marquez and a few other riders, first year on a new bike, and I think he's had he's been very good in qualifying at times. 2 or 3 Q2 appearances, which has been impressive, a couple of them thanks to a good showing on Friday. So I think the potential we're starting to see a bit more from Rins. I'd maybe score Rins a 6 at the moment. And I think he's going to get better as the season goes on. Big thing for Rins is avoiding injury, which has hampered him a lot in recent time. But I think the step for Yamaha is clear to see. I think it's been amplified even more because of Honda sort of lacking a step being made. And I think Yamaha have obviously taken steps forward in the right direction. So I think they've been really impressive. And I do think over the next couple of years, we will start to see them back where they belong. And I think this season we'll look back on in the future as that turning point season. And I think Quartararo has been very, very good. One of the best riders, almost underrated riders so far this season.
Yeah, and I also forget that he did get that podium in the sprint race at Jerez, which was taken away from him because of the pressures. But that was some ride. I think he went from was it like the back of the grid essentially to third, and yeah,
That was the case of whoever stayed on the bike.
that was it though. But he made up so many places still, and I was like, it's such an impressive ride. But yeah. We're all in agreement with Yamaha. The signs are there. The riders are performing well. Obviously, Rins is injured at the minute, but I'm happy with my scores, and I think we're all pretty much in agreement. Factory KTM team next. This was I'm just gonna say I've expected more from the factory KTM team this year. There's been, Pit Bowers came out and said that they're just not delivering really they're giving their riders the right tools. They're kind of struggling in certain areas. Give Brad Binder a 6.5, which I think is fair. I give Jack Miller a 5.5 because Jack is losing his seat. And I just think he just struggles in races where he would start well and then the pace would drop off. And yeah, I think that's pretty fair, Pete. I've expected more from him because I hold the KTM teams in such high regard because, they are the factory KTM team and they have shown so many good performances over the past few years. But this season, and of course with that rookie and the other team showing them up as well, it hasn't really helped them, has it?
It's been a step back so far, isn't it? Yeah, as you say, I think Binder was he was fourth at the end of last season in the standings, and I think he was about fourth at this stage, wasn't he? He was almost in that title fight, wasn't he, by this stage, and it just slipped away in the second half of the year. Whereas now you'd say, they're a long way off at the moment, KTM, aren't they? And as you say, Acosta is their guy, leading their challenge. So yeah, I would say yes. I put Binder on about 7. I put Jack maybe 6.5, just because, as I say, the bike is the question mark. If Pit Bar is coming out and saying, look, it's the tools, it's the bike that needs to improve, then that is where they're lacking at the moment. But on the other hand, as you quite rightly say, Jordan, you've got that rookie guy Costa who's on the same bike and he's ahead of them both. So those are the two sides of the grade, I think.
Yeah, and Binder's season started so well, Rob. Like he was so fast in Qatar, and I thought, well, this is it now. You've seen Acosta and Binder being up there, like, well, KTM have got 2 riders that can really take it to the Ducatis and the Aprilias, but it's just been a bit sort of underwhelming, I think, for both KTM factory riders, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it has, and I think what's not helped is we expected a lot more. The end of last season, KTM could have won the Valencian Grand Prix with both Binder and Miller, and they both crashed out. So that sort of could have set the tone for this season by taking a victory to end last season. And then, like you said, Binder was extremely competitive. I think it was 2 second places in the 2 races in Qatar, and obviously started the season with what we all expected as a potential championship contender, not only because of the bike, but because I think we all trust and believe that Brad Binder is one of the best riders on the grid on his day. But it's kind of fallen apart in a few ways, and obviously Jack Miller has never really got on board with that bike this season. He had a much better season last year. I think he's looked a little bit run down this season. The pressures sort of seem to appear on his face at times, and he's just not been enjoying this second season at KTM. I think that's been quite clear. So I agree. With both of your scores, I think a 5.5 to a 6 for Miller and around a 6.5 for Binder. I think the bike is a little bit better than maybe the results we've seen consistently. Not saying that it is the best bike on the grid. We know it's not, and I think Aprilia have overtaken KTM. So we have to sort of put that in perspective. And someone like a Brad Binder and a Jack Miller, we know that they will ride their heart out and to the best of their ability. So I don't think we can doubt them at all on that. Just disappointing because we've seen this before with KTM, where they started strong, sort of faltered a bit, and it's not too apparent as to why. And I think that's why they're scratching their heads. And Pit Byra had some strong comments in Sachsenring saying, we need to provide the riders with the tools. We're not doing that at the moment. So why that's the case, I think we would like to know the answers. Obviously, they would too. But I think, not a great season, but not a bad season so far. And I think they've got time to rectify it.
Yeah, they do. And that's the beauty of this season. They've got another half of the year to completely turn it around. But speaking of KTM and their GASGAS team at Tech 3, Pedro Acosta, now, I give him an 8 purely because I think it's been such a refreshing thing to see a rookie come in and just just do what he's done. I think it's been brilliant to see. Kind of dropped off a little bit towards the latter part of the first half of the season, but he's still been so strong. And I think he graded himself like 4.5 or so. I think he said that. I was like, that's a bit harsh on yourself, Pedro. You've got podiums and you've been fighting for race wins at certain points. But yeah, an 8 for Acosta, and I give Augusto Fernandez a 5. I'm sorry, Augusto, I just don't see you on TV enough, or really, and I can see that he struggled a bit more this year, a lot compared to last year. That's my grade for him, Pete. I think 8 for Acosta is fair, and a 5 for Augusto Fernandez is pretty fair too.
Yeah, I think Acosta definitely deserves an 8, despite what he himself might think.
Yeah,
as you say, I mean, to be top KTM, firstly, against the likes of Binder and Miller, that in itself is no mean feat, is it? So, and he's right up there challenging Vinales to be best of the rest behind the Ducatis, and we know the Ducatis at the moment are proving pretty formidable. So, I think that's fully deserved. I think that as a rookie, he hasn't really made much mistakes, has he? And he's dealt with it well. I think his first half of the year in MotoGP, big learning experience, obviously, and we know he's somebody that sort of takes things in, thinks about it, and comes back stronger. So it'd be interesting, given the step that he seemed to make over the winter, wasn't it? Tried the bike at Valencia. It was a good test, but nothing spectacular. Comes out at Sepang, bang, he's suddenly matching Pol Espargaro, Danny Pedrosa on his first laps at Sepang. So what will we see, after the summer break? Now he's going to have a little bit of time to think more. I think he's been to KTM, hasn't he? The headquarters, gone there to visit the factory, visit the engineers, the management, all that kind of stuff. So I think Acosta, there's obviously more to come from him, but I think, I don't see him losing this position, should we say, as the top KTM at the moment. As you say, it all depends on what they do with the bike. That's where the emphasis is at the moment on KTM. They need the engine's strong, the aero's strong, but there's something with the grip and the turning that's not quite working. Is it this new rear tyre compounds? Is it something to do with that still? Who knows? But as you guys have said, they need to get on top of it, really, because it's holding all of their riders back at the moment. Augusto Fernandez, I think he's about where he was at the end of last year, so he hasn't made that progression, has he? And really, he hasn't looked comfortable on the bike right from the Sepang test, the first test of the year. Sounds like he's going to get a few signs of sort of hope with the setup and the feeling, but it's a difficult one at the moment. I think about a 6 or something like that. And it's let's see what he can do. But clearly it's not be the second year that he needed, and like Miller, he's looking for a ride, isn't he?
Yeah. Like you said, Peter Costa's been busy as well. I've seen a post that he was actually doing some WP suspension testing on a Moto2 bike as well in Austria for KTM. So that's not a bad test rider to have. I don't know if it's going to be valuable feedback because, he does incredible things, and what he's doing on a Moto2 bike testing, well, maybe they're going to make a breakthrough there with that as well. But yeah, Rob, what's your take on the GASGAS boys? Has it been, obviously Acosta's maybe exceeded expectation or lived up to it, but the scores I think we both gave are relative to where they are.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go a little step further and give Acosta an 8.5. I think he's been tremendous. I think this is one of the best rookie seasons we've seen in a very, very long time. Given the fact that he's been close to a victory, or at least he's been challenging at the beginning of races for the top positions in a season where not only do Ducati have clearly the best bike, but one of the best rider lineups we've ever seen. And Acosta is leading that charge for KTM. Like Pete said, he's challenging Vinales as the best non-Ducati. And to do that in a season like this as a rookie is, I don't think I can say it enough how impressive he's been. And, the last couple of races have been a little bit disappointing. But, even in Assen, where he didn't really have the pace all weekend, time the Grand Prix came, he was challenging, for a top 5, and he crashed on the last lap just by, giving it his all. So I think Acosta has been very, very impressive, and I think he's only going to get stronger as the season goes on. I think the big one is Augusto Fernandez, because we talk about some riders potentially losing their seat but staying on the grid, and how that can maybe impact a little bit the grade. And I think Augusto is a real contender to lose his seat in MotoGP, and I think he probably is the most likely of all the riders at the moment, which is disappointing for him. But at the same time, the performances just haven't been there. On a bike that Acosta has been taken to the podium, Fernandez has sort of been battling in that, we call it the Japan Cup. he's been struggling to beat the Hondas at times, and Acosta is 20, 30 seconds up the road, and you just can't have that at this level. So I think a 5 is very accurate for Fernandez. I wouldn't give him more than that at all. I think it's been a very difficult second season. I just don't see where the improvements have come. So I think it's a season that we're going to look back on where he's sadly lost his seat in MotoGP.
Yeah, let's see what can happen in the second half of the year. So we've got a few more teams left. BR46, we'll go through these fairly quickly. I give Marco Bezzecchi, it's probably going to be controversial to some people. I give him a 5.5. I think at this point last year, he had won, I think it was 3 Grand Prix. He looked so good on the GP22. Yes, we know the jump has been really difficult for the riders that have been on the 22 to the 23, but so much expectation, I think, was on Bezzecchi this year to lead VR46. He rejected that Pramac, the factory bike, the 24, and I don't know if he regrets that now, but yeah, I think it's been a real disappointing year. The only thing being he got that podium at Jerez where he looked like he was getting back to a level where he was able to challenge with Marquez in the strongest 23 bikes, but it hasn't really been there since. Fabio Di Giannantonio has been really impressive. I give him a 7.5. I think the adaptation's been really good. The only thing really missing for Digi, a podium. I think, like Alex Marquez getting the podium, Digi obviously had a massive crash last time at the Sachsenring, and he looked pretty good until that point. And yeah, I think a podium should be around the corner for him. Pete, do you agree with those scores, or anything else to add?
Yeah, I think that you summed it up well there, Jordan. Yeah, I think, like you say, Bezzecchi, it's obviously been a massive disappointment. He's about, 8, 9 places down, isn't he, from where he was this time last year in the standings. The one highlight is the podium, and that's what he does have over Digia, as you say, and that's the one thing that's missing from Digi. But otherwise, Digia's come into that team. Not easy coming into VR46. I think we've said it before. He's not a member of the academy, so it really is a new team for him, and he's settled in really well. And yeah, so yeah, I'd agree with your scores on both of those.
Rob, scores for the VR46 boys?
Yeah, I pretty much agree. 7 for Fabio and 5.5 for Bezzecchi. I think for Bezzecchi, like you said, Pete, and it's a good point, he does have that podium, and it's sort of that shining light on his CV for 2024. But when we look at last season to this season and we analyse all the riders as we're doing, I would go as far to say I think he's been the biggest disappointment this season, just because of the wins he had last season and the fact that on the year-old bike, he was the Marc Marquez of 2023, challenging the likes of Martin and Bagnaia. But instead, he's not only been nowhere near those sorts of results, but he's then been out sort of performed and overshadowed by his new teammate who's coming into that team and hit the ground running with that bike. And also, a point to make is Di Giannantonio was better than Bezzecchi at the end of last season. And so he's come into a new team and then carried that on and sort of led that team. So I think it's not just this season that Digia has actually had a little bit more form than Bezzecchi. So I think he's been the star rider in that team. He's been very, very impressive and has closed the gap, I would say, to Marc Marquez quite considerably in the last few rounds. Whereas, obviously, Alex had a great weekend in Germany, but Alex Marquez and Bezzecchi are still quite a way off Marc Marquez on the GP23. But I think Digia is a lot closer, and it's been a very good season for him. And obviously, it looks like he's going to stay with that team. So I think that is very well deserved.
Yeah, and it looks like from what we hear, it'll be a factory. Well, it'll be a same spec 25 bike next year for Di Giannantonio. So very well deserved. Let's see how he goes in the second half of the year. So we've got 2 teams left. We've got LCR Honda and Repsol Honda. These grades, like we said, it's very similar to the Yamaha. You're trying to balance that rider performance versus the bike. To be honest, it's like I've give all the riders 5s and 6s. I've give Nakagami a 5. I've give Marini a 5. I've actually give Zarco a 5.5, and I've give Joan Mir a 6, purely because I give Joan Mir a 6 because he's leading the Honda Cup, we could call it. He's got the most points, which, yeah, it's tough because they're just struggling so much. And I think it's with Mir, I can see that he's trying really hard. I know they're all trying, but he's having the same crashes every time. It's the front end closes, he just looks frustrated. But it looks like he's going to stay with Honda next year, and he wants to continue with that project, which is a positive, I think. He wants to not really throw in the towel, Pete. And it's the same for all of them, really, isn't it? They're just trying to, I don't know, how you boost morale at this point. They're just trying to keep working, really, aren't they?
Yeah, that's it. They're limited by the machinery, aren't they? More than any other manufacturer on the grid. The Honda, they're waiting for that breakthrough or that step forward, aren't they? As you say, with Yamaha, we're seeing signs that they're heading in the right direction. They've got a new engine coming and things like that they're hopeful for. With Honda, we're still waiting for it sounds like there'll be some more big upgrades coming sort of in the autumn and that kind of thing, which sort of tells you that they're not quite, they're not quite there yet. They're not making the small changes. They're still looking for the big changes. I'd go with that. Your scores, I mean, as you say, I agree with your reasoning. Mir, I'd give 7. Just because he's the top guy on that bike.
Yeah.
As you say, it all depends on how much you tilt it towards the result and how much you lean it on the actual bike itself. I think Zarco. So it's obviously he was way up in the top 6 of the championship, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Pramac this time last year. So it's been a big drop for him. Same for Marini. I mean, all you can say about that really is that they've kept their morale up, haven't they? They're not criticising it. They're not moaning. They know they signed up for a difficult project. But, the key thing is that they have to make progress, isn't it? Because it's one thing to say, oh, they're keeping their chin up after the first half a season. But you look at guys like Mir, especially Nakagami, who's been on that bike for years and years and has been waiting for it. And you can understand why they're a bit, that their patience is a bit shorter and their fuse is a bit shorter sometimes when they're talking to the media, because they're riders by nature are impatient, aren't they? They want results. Their careers are short. And it's not easy for anyone on a Honda at the moment. So I mean, between 6 and 7, I think, and I put Mir at the head of the group just because you can only beat the guys, or your first job is to beat the guys on the same bike.
I feel really bad now. My scores, you make me feel a wee bit sort of. You've actually guilt tripped me into my scores, so I have it. But it's difficult, isn't it, Rob? It's like the thing is with Marini, like he was so strong on the Ducati last year at races, but you look at his race times this year, and like they're nowhere near it. And it's like I know it's a difficult project. I know the bike is so tough to ride, but even the Honda at certain races this year has been slower than it was last year. Like, and that's taken in Marquez's performance on them when he was struggling last year at points too. Nakagami saying some really, like, after that race in Sachsenring, he's kind of mentioned that he doesn't really know what his future is. He doesn't really have an option outside of staying. If he doesn't stay, he's essentially gone out of MotoGP. Difficult, isn't it, to score the Honda boys at the minute?
Very, very difficult. Hopefully my scores will make you feel a little bit better. Marini and Nakagami, I'd say the same, a 5. A 6.5 for Mir, sort of in between you guys. And then Zarco about a 6 as well. I think those two have been obviously the two best Hondas. And the aspect about Mir and the crashes is it's not just individual mistakes every time and he's not learning from his mistakes. It's just a case of he's trying to push that bike as much as he can. So I think when I look at the crashes, similar to both of you guys, I sort of discount them as not really mistakes as such. It's just he's trying to find the limit and just trying to be competitive, because at least they can gain real valuable data if he's sort of mixing it with those other bikes in a race, even though he's then obviously not getting the end result. It's been a season where, and this is a few years ago, but if we go back to sort of the COVID season and we look at, obviously Marini was in Moto 2 at that point, but, Nakagami was fighting for wins on a Honda and sort of having his best year, and then Mir was world champion and Zarco was in contention, and now they're all at Honda together just, 2-3 seasons later. And, they're just riding around at the back of the grid, and it's sad to see because, obviously Nakagami hasn't got the greatest CV in terms of MotoGP, but they're all three of them are riders who have shown the potential to win, and in Mir and Zarco's case do have race wins. And so I think from that perspective, you've got to say they have been limited so much by Honda's situation and predicament that they're in, and it's on them to get better. Whatever happens with their rider lineup for next season, fundamentally Honda have to improve, and they've got to give to their riders to a much bigger degree than KTM. They've got to give their riders a bike to show the talent that we all know they have. Yeah. And that's what they're not doing at the moment, and why their riders are being impacted in a way by the greys, even though we're seeing and we're grading them for the positives that they're able to still show through this difficult time. Whether it's the riders because of the bike or just the manufacturer as a whole, Honda have been the biggest disappointment. That's without question. And they've got a long road ahead and some serious thinking to try and get this back on track, because it's a massive fall from grace from a few years ago.
It is, yeah. And like I say, we'll do a podcast on Honda soon. You could do one on just what the situation is there and how they get out of this mess that they're in, essentially. Yeah, that's all the teams. Well, that's all the riders covered. Just want to go through manufacturers quickly. I'll just list off what I've got for the 5. So Ducati, I'd give it 10. Perfect. Personally, I think it's been perfect for them. Look at the standings; they've just been brilliant. And that GP24, I think, go down as one of the greatest MotoGP bikes I've ever seen, and it's a testament to the work that they've done. Aprilia, it was between an 8 and a 7.5. I went with a 7.5 because I think there's still more to get out of that bike, and it still fluctuates up and down. Maverick have performed really well, but with the others, we've just kind of seen ups and downs. And let's see when they have the whole of their riders on the GP24, their 24 bike, what they can do that way. That'll be a better indicator. KTM, I give a 7 because of Pedro Costa. He brought that up. I think he's been their saving grace. Yamaha, I give a 6. I think it's fair. Give me a 6.5. There's improvement there, and they're making the right moves in terms of next year and stuff. So I think that's promising. Honda, I'd give a 4, which I think probably is a bit generous for that bike, to be honest. But yeah, signing Lisa Spargaro, that's a good thing, at least for the future. That maybe could boost it a bit more. A 4 is probably a bit too harsh, but let's see what they can do in the second half of the year. Pete, just give me your 5 scores quickly, and then we'll see how we compare.
Yeah, as you say, Ducati, I think for me, nearly perfect. I'll go with 9.8 just because Vinales beat them in Kota. So, I'll take that one off of there. But yeah, as you say, a bit of early chatter as well, I suppose. There was a bit of chatter issues, but they've got on top of that. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, it's really been almost faultless, hasn't it? Aprilia, I'll go with 8 for Aprilia, just because they've moved ahead of KTM. They found some consistency that they've been lacking. Vinales is obviously one. That their riders are higher up than they've been in previous years, both of them. But on the other hand, they've taken a bit off some of their strengths in some other places, haven't they? The tracks like Barcelona and some other places that we thought they'd do better. That it seems like the 24 bike has maybe lost a bit. It's gained in braking, maybe lost a bit in the fast corners. KTM, yeah, maybe 7, just because they have had a step back. But as you say, Acosta is the shining light there, and they've got him signed up, haven't they, for a few more years. So if we take in the off-track stuff as well, and actually, I suppose with that in mind, I'll give Yamaha a 7, but that's because their wins have been off-track this year, haven't they?
Yeah.
Re-signing Quartararo, getting Pramac, Max Bartolini coming in as well. I think that the potential there for the future, this big step that Ducati take on the Sunday that all the other factories are trying to chase, well, Bartolini's the perfect guy to tell Yamaha the kind of things they need to be doing to make that step. And as you were saying previously, with the satellite team, they'll have more data next year, so they'll be able to put in some of these processes that Ducati somehow seem to run, and the analysis that they do on a Saturday night, and they come out even stronger, don't they? So maybe Yamaha will be able to use that knowledge that they've got with Bartolini to do something similar. And Honda, I mean, I suppose 6 or something, but I mean, they're still very much work in progress, isn't it? Yamaha was seeing, as we've mentioned, the engine seems to be coming along, that there's been some promising talk. We're not really hearing that from the Honda guys at the moment, are we? We hear things that they think are better at one track, but then they get to another and they're not sure, and that kind of thing. Marini did sound more confident that they're heading in the right direction now, that it seems like the bike they had at the start of the year, that was a radical change, wasn't it? There was big changes there, and it actually looked quite promising at Sepang, didn't it? We were actually saying, maybe they've taken all the information that Mark gave them and they've had the time to put it together. But it seems like now they're sort of thinking that it's not the wrong direction to go.
That was it, wasn't it? And then they've had to counterbalance it and get back to where they wanted to go, so it's taken a while. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So I think that's, as I say, very much work in progress there, and we need to wait and see what the next upgrade will be, the critical one, because that's going to be the one for this season, really, as far as changing results for this year. Because the next step that we'll see, the big step, will be the end of season Valencia test, won't it? I think we've got the Misano test coming up. Obviously, they can do private tests as well, but the Misano test before those flyaways, I mean, it's all very well having testing time, but there's no time in the flyaway schedule, is there, to do it? So
Sure.
that will be the thing. What they bring to that test, if it works well, maybe they could do something in the flyaways, but it's really their last chance, I think, for this season.
It is. Rob, give us your scores for the 5 manufacturers.
Well, I mean, Ducati, if I could give them more than a 10, I would. I think they've been, incredible. I think Vinales did exceptionally well to get his win when he did, because I don't think there's going to be many wins for the other manufacturers the rest of the season, especially with Bagnaia and Martin in a title fight. They've got the best bike in the GP24. They've probably got the second best bike in the GP23 at this point. And they've got the riders to match. So the consistency of their riders, the amount of riders at Saxon Ring, it was Martin, Bagnaia, the two Marquez, Bastianini, Morbidelli come to the end of the race, and then Oliveira. So, it's just, and that was a track that only a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, the Ducati couldn't perform at.
Yeah.
So the turnaround that they've had and have kept going into this season has been incredible. So a 10 from me. Aprilia, like Pete, an 8. I do think they've been really strong, and I think Vinales has shown that, as we've all said. I think, like you said, Jordan, there's maybe a little bit more to get out of that bike, but I think we've still got to give them huge props considering the year Ducati have put together. And Vinales has been able to challenge them at certain racetracks. So I'd say that they've been obviously the clear second best. I've been a little bit disappointed with KTM this season, I've got to admit. So I think a 6.5 for me. Like you've both said, Acosta has added to that grade quite substantially. I think he's been tremendous, as I've said. Disappointed from the factory team and what they've achieved. So I think that is where sort of most of it lies for me in terms of where I'm scoring them. I'd give Yamaha the same grade, again, like Pete and yourself, Jordan, said, for different reasons. The sort of wins off track, keeping Quartararo, securing Pramac, and making clear steps forward. Those are 3 fundamental things that I think they've got right in 2024. So I think Yamaha have shown a lot of progress. And going into next season, I think we're going to see them right back, challenging inside the top 10 consistently. And then Honda. I guess similar to you, John, I'm going to go with a 4.5, that sort of grade, just because, you know that they're trying, and a manufacturer of Honda's size, I don't doubt that they'll find a way at some point. What that find a way looks like in terms of performance, will they ever get back to the sort of dominance they once had? Unlikely, just because of how close MotoGP is. That doesn't mean they can't get there, but I think, it's just been a very difficult season, and when, any time that there's a glimmer of hope, it just seems to be squashed straight away, and then one step forward is 2 steps backwards. And obviously losing M.Marquez last season, I think we've seen even more this season the struggles and how much he sort of paved over those cracks the last couple of seasons. So I think Honda probably the toughest period they've ever gone through at the moment. I hope they get through it. And as we know, the end of season test will be very, very important for them in terms of starting 2025. In the right vein of form. So a 4.5, but hopefully they can find some improvements.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's see what Honda can do. Just to add, Pete, I think I'm correct in saying the concessions haven't changed from the midpoint review. Is that correct? Would that be fair to say? There's going to be no changes really that side of things.
As long as my maths was correct, yeah. No, I did ask and just double check, and I was told, it looks like basically there's been a bit of movement. Ducati have actually increased their, just to follow up on what you guys were saying about the near perfect year. They've increased their percentage of the maximum total. That's what it is, isn't it? I think they're on 96%, and that runs back to the start of the summer break last year through to this year. So that's a full 12 months of racing, if you like. And they've scored, I think, 96% of the potential maximum constructors score. So no changes so far. So Ducati will stay on A, ranking. KTM and Aprilia are C. Nobody's on B. And Ducati, the two Japanese teams, Honda and Yamaha, will remain on D. And to be honest, it doesn't look like nobody's really near the borderline of any of those bands. So I think it's going to be a while till we see any changes, because to actually shift what you'll need. I mean, for example, Ducati, as we say, they're up in the mid-90s. They'd need to drop to 85 to go into B. Well, that a 10% drop, that's what there's 700 odd points in a year, so they'd have to lose 70 plus points compared to what they have been scoring, if you like. So, and when you've got 8 bikes on the grid, there's always another bike, isn't there? So
true.
I don't expect. There's obviously no changes for this year, and the next review will be at the end of this season. That will cover all of this year's points, and to be honest, I'd be surprised if there's anything for next year at the rate it's going.
Yeah, that's pretty much it for this week, folks. We've covered a lot there, a longish podcast, but yeah, there's nothing really else to talk about in the summer break. No rider news confirmed yet of anything. So yeah, fairly quiet week MotoGP. And yeah, if you enjoyed the episode, like, subscribe on YouTube. Leave your comments and your grades below. Love reading those. Listening on Spotify or Apple, give us a review. Make sure to leave that. It helps out massively with the ranking of the podcast and such and such. Thank you for the support so far this season. It's been great. And yeah, we'll see you next week for another podcast.